They built a gun so large it needed its own train tracks. They built a helicopter before anyone knew what that was. These 20 vehicles prove that reality is stranger than fiction. We are counting down the craziest designs ever discovered, ending with a machine so mysterious that only one was ever found, and it was buried in Japan. 1. Panzer VIII. Maus. You might think you have seen big tanks before, but nothing prepares you for the Maus. This was not just a tank. It was a rolling bunker that weighed a mind-blowing 188 tons. To put that into perspective, that is the same weight as 30 African elephants stacked on top of each other. The engineers were obsessed with size, believing that if they made something big enough, nothing could stop it. They gave it armor that was nearly 10 inches thick and a main gun that looked like a telephone pole. It was designed to be the ultimate unbreakable wall on the battlefield. But here is the thing nobody tells you. Being that big is actually a nightmare. The Maus was so heavy that it could not cross any bridges. If it tried to drive over a standard stone bridge in Europe, the whole structure would just crumble instantly under the weight. So, the engineers had to come up with a wild solution. They added a snorkel system. The idea was that the tank would submerge itself and drive underwater across rivers while hooked up to another tank on the shore for power. It sounds great on paper, but in reality, it was a muddy disaster. Only 2 of these metal giants were ever fully built. When the opposing forces were closing in, the crews tried to destroy them so they would not be captured, but they were so tough that they barely got a scratch. The Soviets eventually captured one, and you can still see it today in a museum. A silent reminder of when engineers lost touch with reality. But if you think the Maus was too big, just wait. The next vehicle on our list makes this giant tank look like a toy car. 2. Land Cruiser 1000 Rade. If the Maus was a monster, the Rade was a god. This wasn't just a tank. It was a land battleship. The plans for this machine are hard to even comprehend. We are talking about a vehicle that would have weighed 1,000 tons. That is 5 times heavier than the Maus we just looked at. It was going to be so large that it would have needed a crew of 40 people just to operate it. It was effectively a moving building with cannons. The main weapons on this thing were not tank guns. They were naval guns taken straight off a battleship. Imagine seeing a pair of 22-foot long cannons rolling toward you on land. The sheer vibration of its engine would have shattered windows miles away. The engineers planned to put a vehicle bay inside of it, meaning this tank was so big it could carry motorcycles and scout cars inside its own belly. It was the ultimate expression of ego over engineering. But there was a massive problem that anyone with common sense could see. There was no road, no train track, and no field in the world that could support it. If you drove the Rate out of the factory, it would likely sink straight into the earth and get stuck forever. It would have been a sitting duck for aircraft, a giant target that you could see from space. Thankfully, this metal beast never made it past the blueprint stage. Someone finally realized it was a terrible idea and canceled the project. But while the Rate was too big to exist, the next vehicle was real, and its shape is something you have to see to believe. 3. The Kugelpanzer. Now we are getting into the territory of the truly unexplainable. In a museum in Russia, there sits a vehicle that looks like it rolled out of a comic book. It is called the Kugelpanzer, which translates literally to ball tank. And that is exactly what it is. It is a perfect sphere with 2 rotating sides and a little stabilizer wheel in the back. It looks less like a military vehicle and more like a giant bowling ball meant for a giant. For decades, experts have stared at this thing and scratched their heads. It has a tiny viewing slit in the front and an entry hatch in the back. Inside, there is just enough room for one person to sit in a cramped, dark space. The armor is thin, only about 5 millimeters, which means it would not stop anything heavy. It was powered by a small motorcycle engine, but the real mystery is what it was for. There is no paperwork for it, no manual, no photos of it in action. The leading theory is that it was a reconnaissance vehicle, designed to roll across no man's land to spot enemy positions. But think about how bumpy that ride would be. The driver would be spinning around inside a metal ball while getting shot at. It was found in Manchuria in 1945, and it is the only one of its kind in the world. It remains one of the biggest mysteries of the war. But while the ball tank was rolling on the ground, our next invention was trying to do something even harder. It was trying to hover. 4. Flettner Full 282 Colibri. When you think of the 1940s, you probably think of propeller planes and gliders. You do not think of helicopters. But the Colibri, which means hummingbird, was exactly that. It was one of the world's first production helicopters, and it did not look like the helicopters you see on the news today. It had a very strange design called intermeshing rotors. This means it had two blades on top that spun in opposite directions, looking like an egg beater. This design gave it incredible stability. It could hover in place perfectly, which was like magic technology back then. The Navy wanted to use it to spot submarines from the air. It had an open cockpit, meaning the pilot was sitting right out in the wind with nothing but a glass bubble in front of him. It was loud, it was shaky, but it actually worked. Pilots loved it because it was agile and could land on a tiny patch of ship deck. However, it was a case of too little, too late. Only about 24 of them were built. Most of them were destroyed by their own pilots to keep them from being captured. But the few that survived shocked the Allied engineers who found them. They could not believe this technology existed already. It was a glimpse into the future of aviation. But while the Colibri was small and agile, our next entry goes back to the obsession with being heavy. In fact, it is the heaviest weapon ever used in human history. 5. Schwerer Gustav. Prepare yourself for the biggest gun ever built. The Schwerer Gustav was not just a cannon. It was a railway monster. This thing weighed nearly 1,500 tons. You could not just drive it to the battle. You had to build a special set of double railroad tracks just to move it. It was 4 stories tall and over 150 feet long. When it arrived at a location, thousands of men had to work for weeks just to set it up. The shells this gun fired were the size of small cars. Each bullet weighed 7 tons. To put that in perspective, one shell weighed as much as a school bus. When it fired, the sound was so loud it could burst the eardrums of anyone standing too close. The shockwave would knock people over. It was designed to smash through the thickest concrete forts in the world. And it did. At the siege of Sevastopol, one shot from the Gustav penetrated 100 feet of earth and exploded an ammunition depot stored deep underground. But like the other giant projects, it was a logistical nightmare. It was too slow to move, too easy to spot from the air, and it required an entire army just to operate it. After firing only a few dozen shots, the barrel would wear out and need replacing. In the end, the crews blew it up to prevent capture. It was a terrifying display of power, but totally impractical. But sometimes the scariest things come in small packages. Our next vehicle proves that size isn't everything. 6. Goliath. Tracked mine. Imagine you are a soldier hiding in a trench. Suddenly, you see a tiny tank, no bigger than a dog crate, rolling toward you. It has no driver. It makes a buzzing electric sound. That was the Goliath. This was not a vehicle for a person. It was the world's first remote-controlled demolition robot. It looked like a toy tank, but inside, it was packed with 165 pounds of high explosives. The operator would stand far away, holding a control box connected to the Goliath by a long wire. He would steer the little robot across the field, right up to a bunker, a bridge, or a real tank. Then he would flip a switch, and boom! The Goliath would explode, taking out the target. It was a cheap, effective way to clear obstacles without risking soldiers' lives. They built thousands of them, but there was a catch. The control wire was the weak spot. If the wire got cut by debris or a lucky shot, the Goliath would just stop dead in its tracks. Smart soldiers quickly learned they could just cut the wire with a shovel, and the scary robot became a useless piece of metal. Still, seeing a robot tank in the 1940s must have felt like fighting against the future. But if you want to see something that looks like a tank but shoots rockets, you need to see the next beast on our list. 7. Sturmtiger. The Tiger tank was already famous for being dangerous, but engineers looked at it and thought, what if we put a rocket launcher on it? The result was the Sturmtiger. Instead of a long gun barrel, this tank had a short, stubby cannon that looked like a trash can. Seriously, the opening was 15 inches wide. It was designed to fire a massive, rocket-propelled depth charge. These rockets were huge. They weighed nearly 800 pounds each. The crew needed a crane mounted on the back of the tank just to load the ammo. Because the rockets were so big, the tank could only carry 14 of them. Once you ran out, you were just a big metal box. But when it fired, it was devastating. One shot could level an entire city block. The blast was so powerful that the rocket exhaust would scorch the front of the tank every time it fired. They were used for urban combat, designed to knock down buildings where enemies were hiding. Only 18 of them were ever built because they were so specialized. It was a terrifying weapon to face in a city fight, but it was very slow to reload. If you missed your shot, you were in big trouble. From the city streets, we moved to the minefields, where engineers tried to build a tractor that could survive anything. 8. Minenrammer mines are a huge problem for tanks. They hide underground and blow up the tracks. So, the engineers built the Minenrammer, a vehicle designed specifically to run over mines. It looked like a giant armored tractor from outer space. It had huge steel wheels that were taller than a man. These wheels were not made of rubber. They were heavy metal shoes designed to crush anything they rolled over. The idea was simple. You drive this heavy beast into a minefield. The weight of the wheels triggers the mines. The explosion goes off under the heavy steel wheel, but the vehicle keeps moving, clearing a safe path for the soldiers behind it. It was divided into 2 sections that could articulate, allowing it to turn in tight spaces. It looked incredibly futuristic and intimidating. However, it had a major flaw. It was heavy and slow. In the soft mud of the Eastern Front, the heavy wheels would sink. Also, if a mine was too big, it could still damage the wheel enough to stop the vehicle. They built a prototype, but it was eventually captured. Today, it sits in a museum, looking like a piece of farming equipment for a dystopian future. While this vehicle struggled in the mud, our next invention was built to conquer the snow. 9. BMW Schneekrad. War does not stop when winter comes. So, how do you move soldiers quickly through deep snow? You build the Schneekrad. This was one of the strangest motorcycles ever made. The engineers took a standard motorcycle engine and frame, but they removed the wheels. In the back, they added a continuous track, like a mini tank tread. In the front, instead of a tire, they put on a ski. It was a snowmobile before snowmobiles were really a thing. The design was sleek and fast. It allowed a single messenger to zip across frozen lakes and snowy forests where a truck or a tank would get stuck. The driver sat on it just like a bike, leaning into turns. It was a brilliant concept for the freezing winters they were fighting in. But there was a problem. It was very hard to steer. On a normal bike, the front wheel grips the road. A ski on ice tends to slide. If you tried to turn too sharp, the whole thing could tip over. Despite the clever engineering, it never saw mass production like the famous motorcycles with sidecars. It remains a rare curiosity, a cool gadget that never quite changed the game. From the freezing snow, we go to the luxury of the high command, with a car that had way too many wheels. 10. Mercedes G4. Wagon. Most military vehicles are uncomfortable metal boxes. But the G4 was different. This was a luxury limousine that thought it was a tank. It was built by Mercedes specifically for the top leaders to drive around in conquered territories. The first thing you notice is the wheels. It has 6 of them, 2 in the front, 4 in the back. And yes, all 4 rear wheels were powered, making it a 6x4 off-roader. This car was massive. It weighed almost 4 tons, which is heavier than some modern armored trucks. It had a powerful engine, plush leather seats, and a convertible top so the leaders could stand up and wave. It was a symbol of power and status. It was designed to drive off the road, across fields, and through dirt, all while keeping the passengers in total comfort. They only built 57 of them because they were incredibly expensive. Today, only 3 original ones exist in the world, and they are worth millions of dollars. It is a strange mix of high-end luxury and rugged utility. But while this car was stuck on the ground, our next vehicle was trying to master the air again, but with a design that looked like it might crash at any second. 11. Foka Achilles Fa 223. Drache. This machine was called the Drache, or Dragon. It was a heavy transport helicopter, and it looked completely unstable. It had a long fuselage like a plane, but instead of wings, it had 2 giant rotors mounted on outriggers to the left and right. It looked like a giant T-shape flying through the air. It was the first helicopter in the world to reach mass production status, even though the numbers remained low. The Dragon was a beast. It could lift over 2,000 pounds of cargo. They used it to lift crashed aircraft out of swamps and to transport artillery guns to the top of mountains. It could do things that no plane could do. It could hover, fly backward, and land in a small clearing. For the 1940s, this was absolute cutting-edge technology, but flying it was terrifying. If one rotor failed, the whole thing would flip over. The vibration was intense. Allied bombers targeted the factory where they were made, destroying most of the prototypes. Only a few survived the war. One was even flown across the English Channel by a captured German pilot, the first helicopter to ever make that crossing. It was a marvel of engineering that was just a few years ahead of its time. Speaking of weird combinations, our next vehicle is half motorcycle, half tank. 12. Kettenkrad. You have seen motorcycles. You have seen tanks. But have you seen them mashed together? The Kettenkrad is exactly that. The front half is a motorcycle with handlebars and a single wheel. The back half is a tracked vehicle with an engine and 2 tank treads. It looks ridiculous, like someone welded 2 different vehicles together as a joke. But it was actually one of the most useful vehicles they had. It was designed for paratroopers. It was small enough to fit inside a transport plane. Once they landed, they could drive it out and use it to tow heavy guns or carry supplies. The tracks gave it amazing grip in mud and sand, while the motorcycle front made it easy to steer, at least in theory. In reality, if you were going off-road, the front wheel did almost nothing. You steered by using brakes on the tracks, just like a tank. It became very popular because it could go where trucks could not. They even used them as aircraft tugs to pull jet fighters around the runway. After the conflict ended, farmers bought them to use as tractors in the fields. It is probably the only vehicle on this list that had a peaceful second life. It was weird, but it worked. Unlike our next entry, which was a total lie. 13. Neubaufahrzeug. Sometimes you build a vehicle just to scare people, even if it doesn't work well. That was the Neubaufahrzeug. The name just means new construction vehicle. The engineers had a wild idea. What if we put 3 turrets on one tank? It had a main turret with a big gun and then 2 smaller turrets with machine guns, one in the front and one in the back. It looked like a land battleship. They paraded these tanks through the streets of Oslo, Norway to show off their power. They took photos from low angles to make them look huge and invincible. The propaganda reels showed them crushing obstacles, but it was all smoke and mirrors. The truth was, these tanks were terrible. The armor was made of mild steel, which is soft and could be penetrated by almost anything. The multiple turrets made the inside cramped and confusing for the commander. They only built 5 of them. They were heavy, slow, and mechanically unreliable. But for a few months, the world thought Germany had a fleet of super tanks. It was a psychological weapon more than a physical one. Once the real fighting started, they were quickly scrapped and replaced by better designs. But the idea of a multi-turret tank was a dead end. While these were show ponies, our next tank was a secret kept in the dark. 14. Leichtraktor. Before the conflict even officially started, Germany was forbidden from building tanks. So they had to be sneaky. They built a tank and called it the Leichtraktor or light tractor. They pretended it was farm equipment. But this was no tractor, it was a secret prototype tank with a 37mm cannon and a machine gun. To keep it hidden, they did not even test it in Germany. They shipped 4 of them all the way to a secret school deep inside Russia, far away from prying eyes. There, engineers tested the engines and the suspension. It looked strange, with the engine in the front and the turret all the way in the back. It looked like a shoebox on tracks. The testing did not go well. The engine in the front blocked the driver's view and made the crew compartment incredibly hot. The tracks kept falling off. It was a clumsy design, but it was crucial. It taught the engineers what not to do. These tractors were the grandparents of the fearsome Panzer tanks that would come later. They were never used in battle, ending up as training dummies, but they started it all. From a light tractor, we moved to a big tractor. 15. Gross tractor. If the light tractor was the little secret, the gross tractor or big tractor was the big secret. Again, the name was a lie to fool international inspectors. This was a medium tank, much larger and heavier. It was amphibious, meaning it was designed to float and cross rivers. The hull was shaped like a boat, and it had small propellers at the back. They built 6 of them in the late 1920s. Like the smaller version, these were tested in secret. They were big, boxy, and had doors on the side, which is a terrible place for a door on a tank because it weakens the armor. The suspension was complicated and broke down constantly. When they tried to drive them into the water, They realized they were not very good boats either, but these vehicles were vital for training the first generation of tank crews. By the time the real war started, these were obsolete relics. They were parked outside barracks as monuments, a reminder of the secret early days. They look almost comical now, like drawings from a steampunk novel, but they paved the way for the dangerous machines that followed. Now, let's look at a tank that was designed to be fast, really fast. 16. VK 16.02. Leopard. Most German tanks were known for being heavy and slow. The Leopard was supposed to be different. This was a scout tank designed for speed. The engineers wanted something that could race ahead of the main army, find the enemy, and get out fast. It had sloped armor, which made it look sleek and modern, and a powerful engine that could push it to nearly 40 miles per hour. It looked like a baby Panther tank. It had a 50mm gun that could punch above its weight. The design was actually really good. It fixed many of the problems of earlier light tanks. It had thick armor for its size and wide tracks to handle mud. It was the sports car of the tank world, but the military leaders canceled it. Why? Because they were obsessed with big guns. They decided that a light tank with a small gun was useless, no matter how fast it was. They wanted more armor and more firepower. So, the Leopard was scrapped before it ever entered production. The blueprints were filed away, leaving us to wonder how effective this little speedster would have been. While this tank was canceled, our next one was modified to do something unnatural. It was made to swim. 17. Panzer II with floats tanks are heavy metal bricks. They do not float. But the planners for the invasion of England had a problem. The English Channel. They needed to get tanks across the water and onto the beaches. So they took the standard Panzer II, a small light tank, and decided to turn it into a boat. They attached giant metal pontoons to the sides and front of the tank. These were essentially big hollow air tanks. With these attached, the tank could float on the surface. They connected a propeller to the engine via a long rod. The idea was that the ship would drop the tank in the water a mile offshore, and the tank would putt-putt its way to the beach, drop the floats, and start fighting. It looked ridiculous, like a tank wearing a life jacket. They actually converted dozens of them and tested them in calm rivers. But the ocean is not a calm river. In rough waves, the tank bobbed around like a cork, making the crew incredibly seasick. If a wave hit it wrong, it could capsize, sending the tank straight to the bottom. The invasion was called off, and these swimming tanks were mostly sent to the Eastern Front, where the floats were useless. But if swimming on top of the water is crazy, wait until you see the one designed to drive under it. 18. Tauschpanzer III. This is the nightmare scenario for anyone with claustrophobia. The Tauschpanzer, or diving tank, was a standard Panzer III that was sealed airtight. They used rubber seals to plug every gap, every vision slit, and the turret ring. They added a long, flexible hose with a float on top that went up to the surface to suck in air for the engine and the crew. The plan was terrifying. A ship would lower the tank to the bottom of the sea floor, sometimes 20 or 30 feet down. The driver would then navigate blindly along the sandy bottom, guided by a compass and radio instructions, until he drove up onto the beach. Imagine being trapped in a steel box, underwater, in total darkness, praying that the rubber seals don't leak. Believe it or not, it worked. They built over 100 of them. When the sea invasion was canceled, they used them to cross rivers in Russia. The element of surprise was huge. The enemy would be watching a river, thinking they were safe, and suddenly a tank would rise out of the water like a monster from the deep. It was a brilliant, daring piece of engineering. But our next vehicle went the opposite direction. Instead of hiding underwater, it stood tall and exposed. 19. 8.8 centimeter flak on half-track. The 88mm flak gun was a legendary weapon. It could destroy planes and tanks easily, but it was heavy and had to be towed by a truck. It took time to set up. The crews wanted to make it mobile, so in a moment of desperation, they took this giant gun and bolted it onto the back of a heavy half-track tractor. The result was a glass cannon. It had arguably the most powerful gun on the battlefield, capable of taking out anything from miles away. But the vehicle carrying it was basically a soft-skinned truck. It had almost no armor. If someone shot at it with a machine gun, the engine would die. If a mortar landed nearby, the crew was exposed. It looked top-heavy and awkward. The gun was almost as big as the vehicle itself. They were used as bunker busters. They would drive up, fire a few massive shells to destroy a pillbox, and then run away before anyone could shoot back. It was a classic example of improvising with whatever you have left. It was dangerous to be in, but deadly if you were in front of it. And finally, we have a true Frankenstein creation. 20. Mittler Schützenpanzerwagen S-307. By the end of the conflict, German engineers were scavenging everything. When they captured France, they found thousands of French half-tracks. They decided to upgrade them. The S-307 is a prime example of this recycle and reuse madness. They took a French chassis, reinforced the back, and mounted rows of heavy rocket launchers on it. It was a chaotic mix of technology. The engine was French, the tracks were French, but the weapons were German walking Stuka rockets. These rockets were inaccurate, but terrifyingly loud. Seeing this vehicle was confusing for Allied soldiers. It looked like one of their own trucks, but it was firing screamin' memes at them. Many of these were left behind in Normandy. They were mechanical nightmares to maintain because you needed French parts for the engine and German parts for the guns. It symbolizes the end of the line for these bizarre projects, a desperate attempt to glue together whatever was lying around to keep the machine running. It was the final, rusty gasp of a system that had spent years building the weirdest vehicles on Earth.